Hey guys, David here and welcome to Dark Art Guitars. What started out as just a simple project has now turned into a part-time business with plans to make it full-time in the future. I never intended on starting a guitar company, but when I started building guitars, I really fell in love with it and it kept pushing me to new heights, learning new things, and this video shows my journey. It starts off about 3 years ago and then takes you throughout my different guitar builds. You'll see my skill level grow, you'll see my workshop evolve over time, and in the end we will arrive in present day where I think my guitars have really come a long way. Now you've probably noticed this is a very long video. It's kind of a supercut of all of the other videos I have on my now second channel, Dark Art Workshop. And if you want to just let this video run in the background on the TV while you work, that's a great idea. And in case you don't want any commentary, I'll be talking throughout this video sometimes. You can just mute the audio and put on whatever soundtrack you like. I'm never going to be a talking head on screen, so you can just enjoy the guitar building graphics and listen to your favorite bands instead of whatever I put on here. So here we go, starting out with the very first guitar ever built. I called it the Watcher and finished it around March 2023. The reason why I did it is that I was really into CNC. I built this Rattrick Killer Bee here on screen, but I never really did many projects with it. Since I also play guitar, I figured, well, building a guitar on a CNC can't be that hard and would be a fun project. Now, I learned a lot in this project, and while the CNC part was actually not all that hard, having background in CNC, turns out building a guitar is a lot more than just running a CNC. So there was quite a steep learning curve on this build, and I had to redo some stuff. But it is what started this entire journey, and maybe because it was not perfect, but I could see how I could improve it. That's what focused me and motivated me to pursue this further. The reason for the design I chose here, which later then became my Alchemist model, is that I always was fascinated by Strandberg guitars, but I could never justify actually buying one. Just being kind of a mediocre hobby player, I was in the same price range as a lot of people, like maybe the $500 guitars, and I had like one really nice guitar. It was a Solar that I got for like $1,000, but the Strandbergs were just still above that range. So I was like, well, why not build my own? And you can definitely see the similarities, mixing the Strandberg kind of body ergonomics with the horns of a Solar guitar. And well, this proved to be a very popular shape, as the Alchemist model has been my most popular model ever since I first built it. Now, since this wasn't supposed to be a big guitar building journey, I didn't have any guitar specific tools, so I just used whatever woodworking tools I had lying around, kind of made work. I think there were a couple of cheap tools that I bought. Now, I don't think I'm using any of them anymore at this point, since I just got whatever was the cheapest, and they were not great. But it just proves that you can build a guitar even if you do not have a whole bunch of tools. Now, you might argue I have a CNC, which, yes, that is fair. That's how I got into it. But you can use the CNC at a makerspace maybe, or you can, of course, also build all of this by hand. Though that does require a few more specific tools. Just building a guitar with standard woodworking tools, there are going to be a couple things you're missing. Apart from CNC machines, I was also really into like laser cutters. Here you can see one of the cheaper models that I was trying out at that time. They got a lot better, and that is kind of what I built my channel on back then, like 3D printing, laser cutting, and CNC machine. Never really implemented 3D printing much into the guitar building, but maybe that's something to explore in the future, though I don't know, I don't really see the plastic aspect in guitars as much. Now, I vividly remember by far the hardest thing about building his first guitar was the fretting. My first attempt, you can see me here, I'm using like a Dremel to cut them since I didn't have a fret cutter, and then kind of also using the Dremel to get the ends nice. I installed them, but they were not properly installed. They didn't get them in far enough properly, and they were very far from level. So after I finished the guitar, the first thing I did was rip all of the frets out again and completely start over on the fretwork. Second attempt was a lot better. Still not perfect, but it was actually playable. From there on, I just did more and more fretboards and was able to quite fast improve that skill. And then by the third guitar or so, I think my fret jobs were good enough to be able to, I don't know, be used on a nice guitar and not just kind of be the thing that's holding it back anymore. I also used oil finish on the first couple of guitars just because I didn't really want to use lacquer, and oil seemed like a good option, but it took forever to apply and just not holding up quite as well as lacquer in the long term. Now, I'm sure you could also do a better job applying the oil finish, but that's part of it, I guess. After I finished the first guitar, it didn't take me very long to start the second one. I realized that this one was a good first attempt, but there was a lot of different things that I wanted to do differently about it and try out. So the second one. This one is what is now known as the Alchemist, and that's also what I just called this first guitar, and then later it became the name for the model. For one, I wanted to have more pickup options, so I ended up using some Fishmans here. I also wanted a tremolo bridge and just kind of generally improve the quality of the instrument. At this point, I also started with the name Dark Art Guitars before I was going under the name Datulaptech. And I realized that maybe I'll be building one or two guitars every once in a while, so I decided to kind of come up with a Luthier name. Now, in case you're wondering about this bright orange wood that I'm cutting here, this is Paduk, and it's actually really nice. Sometimes used in guitar building, but I'm surprised it's not used more. Over time it does get a bit more brown, but in the very beginning it's super orange and then quite a red with the finish applied. And it's one of those woods that is a bit more expensive, but you don't really have to use a guitar top on them because it just has its own nice character. So you can get away just having a one-piece body, and I think it turns out really nice. This build is also the first one where I built a multi-laminate neck, and this quickly became one of my staple items. Nowadays, most of my guitars have multi-laminate necks. Sometimes still a customer wants just a single piece neck, which of course is perfectly fine. I mainly do these necks for looks and not actually for strength. They do help if there's any kind of weird tension in the wood. By cutting it down into strips, those tensions can release, and then you can glue them up and kind of average out the various tensions. So over the seasonal wood movement, laminate neck can be a bit more stable, but you can also get a perfectly stable neck that is not multi-laminated. So it's not really something that you have to have, but I'm just a big fan of how it looks and kind of creates visual interest. Another thing that I'm stepping up a bit in this guitar is my inlay game. I started using some aluminum and other materials, and of course, since I started using the name Dark Art Guitars, I also have my logo, and it's the first guitar that has it here on the first fret. It's kind of my standard place where I like to put the logo now as well. Now, not all of the guitars have it, I'm not a stickler about it, so if you want a guitar without one, I'll be happy to do that, but I think it looks quite cool to have it on there. And I guess, I know, it's the Majesty series of guitar from Music Man that inspired that placement, and I think it just it's a bit nicer than having it on the 12th fret where the frets are very close to each other and you have to spread it across multiple frets. Now with this build wrapping up here, it's good time to kind of reflect on it. This was definitely a huge step forward from the first guitar, and I actually still play this guitar to this day. It's not quite at the point where I would sell it to somebody, but it's very much a playable guitar and plays a lot better than a lot of kind of cheap to mid-range guitars. Now I did learn some things about the tremolo. It took me forever to first balance it, and I also originally designed like a back cover for it, but it turned out that like when you wanted to go sharp, quite quickly you would actually hit the back cover. I used to hate on Strandberg for not having a back cover, but nowadays I basically never have a back cover either, because I would have to make my guitars thicker in order for the tremolo to have enough range, and I prefer having the guitars a bit thinner and lighter rather than having a tremolo cover. I guess some things are done for a reason. Another thing I really liked on this guitar are the pickups. They're the Fishman Fluence Tosin Abasi, and I've used them on countless builds ever since. It tend to be my recommendation if somebody wants to go for Actives or Fishmans. I prefer their sound signature over the regular moderns. Well, they are also great, and the newer version that has the single coil output as well is much better. But I still prefer the sound signature of the Tosin Abasi ones. Now getting to this point, my mind was already racing with the next guitar builds, and nothing could stop me anymore. I was definitely hooked. I ended up building a guitar for my girlfriend, which she co-designed with me. I did not film anything of that process, so you'll have to go check that out on my website. But what I did film a lot of is the CP-01. This was my submission for the GGBO competition that Crimson Guitars put on. Now I believe it was the last year that they actually put on the competition, and I thought this was really cool. I entered and built this crazy guitar. Now this was way above my skill level, the things that I had planned here, and that meant that not everything quite went to plan. And in a way, the previous guitars were actually more playable in the end than this one, although it's kind of my third/fourth guitar that I actually built. Now this guitar has a really cool two-part body design, where it's a fairly thick maple top and that kind of overhangs over the mahogany body underneath. This was able to give me the really cool cyberpunk aesthetic that I was going for, but also meant that I had to produce multiple components that fit together perfectly and aligned, and everything kind of works together. I also decided to chamber the body because I had easy access to it, so why wouldn't I? Now, foreshadowing, this turned out to be a terrible idea, and the guitar would have been better if I did not chamber it. I also had a little mishap on the CNC, creating a big old scar in the back, and rather than starting over, I ended up incorporating it into the guitar. Liking the multi-laminate neck from the previous guitar, I took it to a whole nother level here, adding way more layers. That actually worked out perfectly fine. But then creating the scarf joint for the headstock, that was a challenge. Because being multi-scale, I didn't want to have a flat spot at the top, so the headstock angle is actually tilted slightly. I used the CNC to kind of hopefully get the angle right, but getting it lined up and properly adjusted later proved to be a challenge. I also had to somehow figure out how to actually hold this on the CNC and machine the various parts of it, because I didn't have the skill to do it by hand. So using the CNC was definitely the better option, but very much challenging. Now, one of the things that I actually think turned out the best about this guitar is the fretboard. For one, I had this really nice looking piece of ebony. Now it was sold as like some fancy Macassar ebony. It just happened to be a very nicely figured regular ebony board. Then for the inlay, I used some different aluminum wires, some brass tubes, and played around with a whole bunch of different things. It took me forever. I spent way too much time on the inlay, which ended up delaying the entire guitar. But I think the end result definitely was worth it. What I didn't fully think through during the design of this guitar is how I was actually going to assemble it. The way it's designed, the neck kind of gets sandwiched between the two body halves. And while that isn't inherently an issue, it just means that I have to glue in the neck as well as glue together the two body halves all at the same time. And at this time, I didn't have very many clamps. I had maybe like 5 or 6 clamps. So getting all of that properly clamped up was very difficult. And I did end up with a couple of gaps here and there. And that could have been avoided if I had used a different design. And since the guitar so far has been way too simple, I decided to make my own hardware, at least partially. I used Graphtec Ghost piezo saddles, because why wouldn't I, and then made my own bridge to have them on. Also the string retainer I machined myself from aluminum and then anodized them in my DIY anodizing setup. In terms of finishing, I'm still very much experimenting at this point, so I used some mahogany grain filler to fill in any of the pores, and then I'm using a kind of purple stain. First go over with a black to make more contrast, and then apply a few too many layers of purple over top, resulting in a quite dark appearance. For the fretwork, I decided to go with semi-hemispherical fret ends, which actually turned out really nice. This fretwork is one of my best, I think, still to this date, just kind of from a visual perspective. I ended up not continuing doing this, for one, because it just takes a long time, but also doesn't really offer playability improvement. It just kind of looks nice. For the finish, I'm using a 2-component rattle can finish, and I sanded in between coats and of course sanded straight through and created little highlight spots where the stain got removed. And instead of sanding everything off and starting over, I decided to embrace it, but it didn't really fit the aesthetic that nice. In the end, the combination of having too dark of a stain with these kind of accents just takes away from the otherwise quite stunning appearance of this guitar. If I were to do it over, I'd definitely have gone back at this step, sanded everything flat, and redone the staining. I also made my custom kind of see-through pickup bobbins and wound my own pickups for the first time in this guitar. You can see I really wanted to do everything possible, including some lights. Now, I did manage to burn out half of the LEDs, half of the colors, so only red really is the only color where all of them light up. But, well, there's no way of fixing that anymore because it is very much glued into the guitar. Now, visually, the result of this guitar is still super striking, and I get comments on it still to this date of people that really like it. But one very fatal flaw that you can't really see in these pictures is just the playability of it. The body is very short, actually too short to be comfortable. It kind of digs into your legs, and being a 7-string with a long neck, there is massive amounts of neck dive. It is to the point where it's almost unplayable, and even using a strap doesn't really work because the balance point is basically at the top strap button, so it's still not really holding it up. I later put on lighter tuners, which helped a bit, but I would have to add some weight back into the guitar, essentially where I chamber it, in order to have it even remotely balanced. In a future iteration, if I ever build this shape again, I would also make the body a bit longer. This will make it more comfortable to play as well as more balanced. Now, the first 4 guitars I of course just built for myself or for my girlfriend, but then at this point Jackson Grimm reached out and was the first customer to request a build by me. This of course meant a lot to me, and I was super excited to get working on it. It's also my first 8-string build, and he had this like really cool design idea with kind of an ice kraken theme. So first starting out here, doing the inlay glow in the dark on the fretboard with that ice kraken aesthetic. It's a tattoo that he also has on his arm, I believe, and it's just gonna really nice to bring that personal aspect into it. At this point, I've also already started working on more than one build at a time. It's quite convenient to have at least 2 builds going at any one time, as there are often times where you just kind of have to let stuff dry and you can't really continue working on it. So if you have 2 going at the same time, that goes a lot quicker. The other builds that I did at the same time here, I didn't get a video, but you can find it as kind of Alchemist Black Magic on my website, and it has like a charred ash body and a nice kind of alchemist or like a witchcraft inspired fretboard design. That one I just built as a stock build, and later when Jackson came by to actually pick up this guitar in person, he liked it so much that he eventually also bought this one. So both of those are now with him and are still being used. You can find them on his Instagram. For angels playing heaven's horns, I see their faces are blazing sorrow. Their wings cover the sky and eclipse the sun. I have nothing left for you to take, so why you standing in front of me? And go away and show mercy then, or I am gonna have to set me free. I know it's the war you came to take upon my own life. I'm selling the cup of my heart. I need you now. Please tell me why. Now, being a not overly complicated guitar from a construction point of view, plus this being my 4th one, just kind of the woodwork was no longer all that big of a challenge for me. But what was definitely a challenge is the finish. The previous guitars have just kind of been very simple color schemes, but here I was supposed to have a kind of ice theme, so white around the outside with kind of light blue shimmering through. Also had the idea in our heads that it would be really cool if you could still see some of the wood grain. Now, this didn't quite end up working out. The alder body that I used here was just too intense in color that the blue didn't really work on it. So it did get like a solid paint job, using different paints and using airbrush to kind of get that on there. Here you can also see the kind of version 0 of my indoor spray booth. This has evolved many times since then. Just the problem is that if you want to spray outside, the days where you can actually do so are very few and far between. It needs to be not too cold, not too warm, shouldn't be too windy, definitely not raining. So spraying inside is a lot more convenient, but for one, there's the overspray to deal with, and of course also the health risks. So just having the window open next to the shower curtain did not really do the trick. The entire workshop was covered in overspray after this. But the only way to learn is to try out stuff, and here then for the second layer I moved back outside. The weather wasn't too bad, and I didn't want to repeat the mistake from the first layer. Not long after I started working on Jackson's guitar, another customer reached out to me. This time a local customer, but still through Instagram, and this is the guitar that he requested. I feel like this was the first one where I set out with a very specific vision, I executed it, and then the end result was actually what I had in mind. Now, of course, I still learned a bunch of stuff, a lot of small details along the way, but there wasn't like any one specific big thing that was super hard or that went wrong. And with this build wrapping up here, I believe you should also be able to see on the video why I was so happy with this build. Just kind of the way that it works together. Part of that stems just from the design and the color scheme appealing to me, but also kind of the finish looked a lot nicer than it did on previous guitars. I was able to get just kind of the curves flowing like I wanted to, and it of course played beautifully in the end. Now with the Alchemist model refined to the point where I'm happy with it, and it actually hasn't really changed since, at least not in the overall shape, it was time to think of a new model. I wanted to go with something a bit more angry, a bit pointier, and that's where I introduced the Necromancer. At this point I also really got into different exotic woods, and I was super excited to have the chance to kind of think of a build, think of all the different woods, and I went quite exotic on this one. The body here is a nice piece of black limba with some really beautiful figure. It's the first time I'm using this wood, and I really like it. I also got a piece of Buckeye burl, and this at that point was by far the most money I'd ever spent on a small piece of wood, but I was super excited to work with it as it just has this incredible figure that far surpasses what you get in poplar burl, which is what I had used so far in terms of burl woods. Now here in the video I just start building the main guitar right away, but actually before I went ahead with that I kind of built a mock prototype. I just glued together some cheap pieces of wood and tested out the shape. This gave me the confidence to know what needs to be changed, made some small modifications, and then the resulting shape actually was quite good already in the first go around, and I didn't have to kind of make multiple revisions of it. This was very important to me because I spent a lot of money on the fancy woods that I used in this build. Now, this doesn't mean that everything went perfectly smoothly, but that is just how any build goes. Now at this point I was also getting much more comfortable on the CNC, and I was really enjoying how the different layers of the wood revealed themselves here in this footage and as I cut in the bevels. What I had completely forgotten in all my excitement was that the Necromancer shape actually has a wider side on one side, so like the center line of the guitar is not necessarily in the center of the body blank. When I glued on the top, I put the center line exactly the center of the body, and then I just simply used the center of the stock as my origin point, set that on the center line expecting it to be perfect. Now the way that the Alchemist model is set up, this actually works out fine, but on the Necromancer this was a big mistake. Now you can't see it all that well in this footage, but the center line of the Buckeye burl top is very much not aligned with the center of the guitar. Luckily, Buckeye burl is a very busy pattern, so you can't see it that well, and the mirror effect is not as strong as in something like flame maple. There it would have been catastrophic. Another new challenge for this build was sanding all of these angled surfaces and having them remain perfectly flat. Now I tried various different approaches here. Using the orbital sander, I used this kind of spring steel sheet with sandpaper underneath it, and a couple other things. On the first try here in this model, I didn't get it perfect. I did round over some of the flat surfaces, and some of the corners aren't quite as pointy anymore. But as I built more of these angled shapes, I slowly got the hang of it. You might think that sanding is easy, but sanding without changing the shape is actually quite hard. The neck construction has gotten fairly standard at this point. I use the bandsaw to cut the strips for the multi-laminated neck, and then on the drum sander I get them perfectly flat and even all the way through. After that I can glue it up and send the whole thing back through the drum sander, and we get a nice neck blank that then can be cut on the CNC. For the fretboard, I had the chance to get these 3 nice Pelman ebony boards at a slightly discounted price. They had some cracks, but I filled those in with black epoxy. So here I'm then choosing which one of those I like best and will fit kind of the aesthetic of this build the best. That's another one of those woods that I have always liked looking at, and now for this build finally decided to go with. For the inlay, I'm also trying out something new. Here I wanted to have some kind of metallic inlays, but like didn't really know exactly what. So I have these different metal powders. There's some aluminum, some brass in there, some like carbon black, some bronze, and I'm just kind of mixing that in there and solidifying it with super glue. Now this process took a while. I was just kind of experimenting, but in the end it turned out quite cool, even though not maybe quite what I had in mind originally. The circles themselves are just some nice brass rounds, and then instead of leaving the center the same color, because the brass doesn't contrast that well with some of the lighter spots, I then filled in the center in black. And that way, kind of no matter if it lands at a lighter or a dark part of the pattern, there will always be some contrast. Now working with this slightly cracked Pelman ebony was definitely not that easy, and I had to go back and fix different things quite often. But half of being a luthier is just fixing things, and getting better at fixing things is how you know that you're learning the craft. In the last build, I was still just using a hammer to drive in all the frets, but I eventually figured that maybe a fret press would be nicer. So I got this fret press here and using it for the first time on this build. Now, in the end, the method I settled on was a mixture of using the fret press as well as a hammer. Here in the first couple, I'm really like wailing on there, but then still some of the ends are maybe not perfectly in, so using the fret hammer is just a bit easier to get it perfectly seated. But the big benefit of using a fret press at first is that the whole thing just goes in a bit more evenly, and you don't kind of introduce any bumps into the frets from the hammering in the beginning. It also just feels a bit better to press it in than to have to violently hammer it in.
It's always fun, dude. Like every time I see it on the routing, I stop them. It's all kind of fun.
Going all out for this build, I also decided to cover up the black pickups from Fishman with some veneer that I made from the cutoff of the fretboard. I had quite a lot left over. These fretboards were big enough for a bass guitar, so I was quite happy to be able to use some of it on the pickups. Now, definitely a bit scary for doing this for the first time, kind of messing up some brand new pickups that I haven't even tested yet, just hoping that they would actually work, since I'm pretty sure that gluing something on top of them does void the warranty. I'm also making my own knobs here for the first time, just doing it mostly manual here, shaping it on the drill press. This process I later refined quite a bit, now I do that mostly on the CNC. But this worked quite well for the first try. For the Buckeye Burl top, as well as the rest of the guitar, I wanted to fill in the pores as well as kind of stabilize and protect the Buckeye a bit. So for the first time here, I'm using an epoxy-based product to kind of fill that in. Now this is Z-epoxy, and while I had seen many guitar builders use it before, it turned out to be quite a learning curve to apply it properly. You kind of put on a thin coat, make sure to spread it out evenly, and on the first one a lot of it soaks into the guitar. You can use different things to spread it out, different squeegees, but in the end usually just your hands work the best. Now this is not actually a clear resin, it has a slight yellowish tint to it. This does create a quite nice effect, especially on these woods. It kind of enhances the color, makes it a bit more vibrant, a bit more warm, and looks quite nice. However, the big problem with the fact that it is not clear is that means that if you sand through it at any spot and there's none left, the color of the wood looks drastically different than the spot where there is more of the epoxy over top. This meant I was chasing my tail a lot, getting it nice and flat, but then having sanded through in a couple of spots, having to go over it again, adding more, and in the end it worked out, but it didn't look quite as even as I had hoped, just because I had to fix so many spots. You could fix this by just applying more to begin with so you don't sand through, but that's not really the best solution either, since ideally you want barely anything left on the surface. And there we go, the first Necromancer build is done, and I absolutely love how this build came out. Now, I had slightly different visions of how the tops was gonna look, but in the end, I'm very happy with what I got, and the neck also looks beautiful with the nice flint maple. And while it was a ton of work and a lot of back and forth, the finish with the epoxy and then the nice satin clear coat over top turned out super smooth and feels great. At first I wanted to keep this guitar and I kept it and played it for a while myself, but then eventually the need to just kind of upgrade the workshop more kind of brought me to go ahead and sell it and invest that money into more machinery and more tools. And I think it was the right choice. Well, it was a great guitar. I wasn't going to be the one that's playing it every day. I barely play guitar nowadays just because I focus more on the building of it. So I think it is at a way better home now. And sharing the progress of this on Instagram while I built it immediately already gave me an order for another Necromancer build, which I didn't film, but that was kind of the next thing I did. There were actually quite a few orders at this point that I didn't go ahead and film. Both having more orders as well as kind of filming taking up a lot of time, I decided to more focus on the building. So the next one I made a video about is serial number 14. It's about 6 months later, and this one turned out absolutely spectacular. While I really loved the number 5, the Orange Alchemist, I think this one even surpasses that. And while I got quite a few more reps in building more guitars, the overall process hasn't really changed much. I'm still using the same machines here as before, and I just kind of focused on refining the craft, learning how to use my tools better, and I think it also does show in the end result. It just kind of is a bit more refined. The overall kind of ideas are the same, but well, you can tell that I've had a few more guitars under my belt. So instead of babbling on, I'm just gonna let some music play and have you enjoy this montage of building this guitar, and then I'll be back with you when it is done and we're moving on to the next one. Now, it turns out there was actually one thing that I did change in my process, and that's that I got a spray gun. Before I was just using rattle cans, and well, that works. It's not exactly efficient, and it's also quite expensive. But turns out getting a spray gun doesn't mean automatically your finishes get easier. The learning curve of how to use it properly is probably still ongoing actually, but on the first few it definitely took me a lot of attempts and a lot of sanding to get the perfect smooth finish. You can also see that I'm still using my shower curtain setup here as a spray booth. Now I did upgrade a little bit and get an exhaust fan that is just kind of at the bottom here that is pulling out some of the fumes and exhausting that out, but still definitely not ideal. mostly in parallel with this guitar, I was building another one called the Vanquisher. It's another new model, this time it's a V. It's heavily inspired by my Necromancer model, essentially just the bottom two horns without the upper two. What this results in is a very compact and portable V. If you are mostly used to the big Deans that are huge and feel like a big old axe, this is not that. This is compact, mean looking and comfortable to play. I actually recorded a voiceover for this video when I originally posted it, so instead of babbling on here, I'm just gonna let past me explain exactly what I did in each step. Now the first step, as always, is preparing the wood stocks, and here I'm cutting some strips from wenge as well as maple, and these will make up the neck blank. I like using these multi-laminate necks, not because they are necessarily much stronger than just a single quarter-tone piece of wood, but I really like the look of it, and it kind of gives me some more creative freedom in the stylings without involving a lot of paint. You can also see that I'm building here two guitars at the same time. You've already probably seen the other build. It went really well here on the channel. It's the Blue Rain guitar, and you will see some steps where I have both here, but I will of course focus on this Vanquisher build here now in this video. After cutting the strips on the bandsaw, I'm just using my drum sander here to get them nicely parallel with some smooth gluing surfaces, and that's just a really quick way to do it. I've done it on the CNC before to just kind of use it as a jointer, but with the drum sander it's a lot easier, and this process is actually quite quick, and it doesn't take much time at all to build these multi-laminate necks. Off camera, I also prepared the body blanks, and this is going to be some swamp ash for this one here. And just glued together a couple of blanks, jointed them with my hand plane, and glued them up, nothing too fancy. Then it's time to move on to the CNCing, and this is the last build I did here on my Radric Killer Bee. If you want to see more about the CNC, I have a whole build series where I go into much depth about building it and upgrading it. But now I'm actually building a new CNC, so this is no longer in my workshop, and you might have seen some of that as well. Now, the way I'll approach the CNCing is that I, well, of course, have to machine from both sides. So first I add some kind of locating holes. These I will later drill into the table as well, and that gives me a way to reference and make sure that when I flip it, everything stays nicely aligned. Then when cutting out these kind of outlines, I'm only going about halfway down. And another thing I'm doing is I'm not just cutting once around, but I'm actually doing like a little bit of an offset by doing roughing passes instead of Fusion 360. And this just gives the chips a lot more space to evacuate. It means I don't get a clogged up hole, and everything runs a lot smoother and will leave a better finish as well. Now I am still leaving like 0.2 or 0.3 millimeters on these sidewalls here, and then once I flip it over, I will finish it all from the same side. This way I don't not get any kind of small seam where the two sides align. I also machine in the bevels first by just cutting them roughly out with some adaptive strategies, and then coming back in with a ball end mill to get everything nicely shaped. I also kind of pre-shape the heel here, but later I will go back in by hand and refine that. To hold the material down to the work surface, I am just using masking tape and super glue trick. This actually works really well. If you just need to make sure that you don't just put the masking tape on there, but really burnish it down, apply some pressure, and then just use some medium super glue to attach the two sticks together. And I haven't really had any issues of it flying off with big pieces like this. For the neck, I'm using much of the same strategies. First, machining in the slots for the truss rod as well as for some carbon fiber reinforcements, and then flipping it over with the same locating trick and machining the outline as well as kind of roughing out the shape, and then using a ball end mill to mostly finish shaping the neck. I will go in ever so slightly and refine it once the fretboard is glued on to make sure it feels nice, but the vast majority of the material I'm able to remove with the CNC, and that saves me just a lot of time. Now, I do get comments every once in a while that using a CNC is so much faster, and by hand is kind of the true way of doing it. And if you think the CNC is faster for building like a one-off build, it's actually very much not. Now, you might not be chiseling there or rasping for as long, but the entire design process and getting all the tool paths to be perfect and everything set up in the machine, in the end, it takes just as long to machine this neck here on the CNC. Now, the benefit is when I'm making the next guitar, I already have all of that design work done, and I can more easily do it this way, and I also get a bit more accuracy. But that is very much a trade-off on how you like to work and kind of how much new stuff you do every time. And the last major thing to do on the CNC is cutting out the fretboard, as well as some of the inlays. I'm trying out a new kind of cross style inlay here, which I'm then filling in with epoxy. And that is just another operation that is really easy on the CNC. You could do this by hand, but that would take a lot more effort. And here, I'm pretty sure it does actually save a lot of time. If you're just doing dot inlays, that works perfectly well by hand, but more complicated stuff like this is really quite fun on the CNC. And then use this 1-inch ball and mill to radius the top of the fretboard. And just doing a 16-inch radius, nothing compound here. That's what I like for my guitars, and I think it looks quite nice as well. Cutting the fret slots with the tiny 0.6mm end mill might seem scary, and I sometimes get comments about how many times I break this tool, but it's actually quite fine. Once you get your strategy nailed down, I basically never break tools in the cut. Now, I've broken more than one, but accidentally brushing against it with my hands while installing it, but that is much on me. This operation here takes probably about half an hour to cut all of these fret slots, which is definitely slower than if you cut them with a saw, but it means I can have them directly hidden without having to bind the fretboard. To glue on the fretboard as well as in the carbon fiber reinforcements, here I'm using epoxy. And the main reason why I'm using epoxy to glue on the fretboard instead of wood glue is because I'm using Richlite as the fretboard material. And it's a composite from kind of resin-infused recycled paper. So while I've heard some reports that Type-on wood glue sticks to it quite well, I didn't want to risk it, so I just use epoxy, as I know that that will work well. I'd love to get into vacuum bagging to properly clamp down the fretboards, but here now I'm just using kind of a radius sanding dish to apply some pressure. But with the neck already cut, it's still not perfect. And sometimes I get a little bit of a gap on the sides because I just can't apply the right kind of pressure to the side of the neck because it's already shaped. I've tried doing it in a different order of operations where I glue on the fretboard first and then cut the neck, but it's just not as convenient for how I like to work. So this is the best way I've worked it out. Before assembling everything, I start with some rough sanding, just kind of getting some of the machining marks off and stuff aligned, but I will do much more sanding at a later stage. Here you can see me using that same radius sanding block to make sure that everything is nicely at the perfect radius as well as nice and straight. Now I do also use just my straight sanding block here every once in a while instead of the radius one, as I feel like it's a little bit more straight and I can more specifically target areas, but I go back and forth between the radius one and just a straight leveling beam to, in the end, get the finish that I need. I will then also afterwards go up the grids just by hand, like after roughly 320 or 400 grit, I don't use the leveling beam anymore as I'm taking off so little material that I can just do it by hand. But I then kind of like to go up to roughly 1000 grit for my fretboards, and that just doesn't quite get them up to fully glossy, shiny, but make sure that they are nice and smooth and have a little bit of sheen to them as well. Before I install the frets, I also apply a first coat of oil, and the reason why I do that, for one, it looks really cool, but also if I get some kind of super glue squeeze out or other dirt on it, it's a lot easier to clean off if it is already oiled, as it will not kind of seep into the material quite as much. Now I make sure that I only have a very small amount on my rag here, as I don't want it to get into the fret slots, as there I want the glue to stick properly. I then prepare the stainless steel Jescar frets that I'm installing here. This is the super jumbo ones, the very largest one they sell. And it is quite a bit of work to install these stainless steel frets, but in my opinion it's like no comparison to nickel silver. And on every guitar I've built so far I've installed stainless steel frets. So to me it's just the way it goes. And I'm using here my arbor press with a clamping hole, installing it. And the first couple of threads, I'm using a feeler gauge to make sure that they are inserted all the way properly. And then once I install a couple of them correctly, I know the process, and then I just go forwards. A little trick that I started doing to get the ends flush more quickly on the stainless steel threads is actually using this edge sander. Now it tears up the paper quite fast and dulls it, but it just cuts down on the time that I need to do by hand to get them nicely beveled and all to the same length by a lot. Now I still go back by hand to get them to the very final size, as I don't trust myself on the belt sander enough to get them all perfect. But instead of having to spend 15 minutes by hand, I only have to spend a couple of minutes to just get it perfect. To get the threads perfectly leveled, I put some Sharpie marks on the top. That way I see which threads have been touched and which not, and then go back to the leveling beam. Here I'm just using the straight one and not the radius one, and that allows me to just go over everything nicely, make sure that all the threads are kissed. If I did a good job, then there's barely anything needed, but every once in a while I don't have a great day and there's a lot more needed. So after that, I need to re-crown the threads. Now, if I only kiss them very slightly, I'm just going to use my kind of fine triangular file to get that back in. But threads that have been taken a bit more off because either they were a bit thicker or didn't insert quite as much, I have this other like Hosco crowning file that is a bit coarser and can remove more material more quickly. It's really worth spending the time here on the fretwork, paying attention to every single thread, making sure the ends are nice, and then making sure that all the scratches are removed. I'm just moving up the grids with some sandpaper here. It goes fairly quick once you get the hang of it, but it's still a bit tedious and definitely hard on the fingers. Paying a lot of attention here, just make sure that in the end you have an instrument that plays really well, and you can set up the low action, and it will be so much more enjoyable and feel so much more premium if the fretwork is done well. That's an easy way you can set yourself apart, even as a beginner builder. It's about just putting in the time on the fretwork, and guitar with good fretwork, you're already half the way to a great guitar. And then the last step, you can also use a Dremel to polish them up, or since I have everything masked up, I'm just using this kind of bigger polishing wheel that I chuck up in the drill, use some polishing compound, and this makes really quick work of polishing up all the frets. Now you do want to be careful not to stay too long on it and overheat the frets. That can kind of loosen up the glue, and you can have a bad day this way. But if you're careful, kind of move back and forth a bit, then it should be fine. And you can clean off the residue with some alcohol, and you're done. All of your frets are installed and nice and shiny. Now, oftentimes for the side dots, I like to install loom inlay, but here I decided instead to have it match white inlay, as the loom inlay material is not quite as white as just white plastic. So here I'm just installing these white plastic rods, drilled the holes. Here you really want to make sure that you have a high quality drill bit. Having high quality brad point drill bit means that you will get little to no tear out, and you will get a very clean inlay. But if you get a bunch of tear out, then you have some spots to fill, and it's going to look ugly. And well, you just need to get that one drill bit size. So for me, it's 2.5 millimeters in a high quality, and you can use regular drill bits for everything else. Before I join the body on the neck, I am doing some more sanding. Some of the areas are easier to reach now before it is assembled. And in general, there is a lot of sanding. I'm showing just a small fraction here in this video, as well, it's about as boring as watching paint dry. But just know that while the CNC might speed up a lot of the kind of routing out and rough shaping, that's a small fraction of the actual guitar building process. All of the sanding by hand, as well as all the finishing, the CNC doesn't really help with. And that, in my case, is the much bigger fraction of the process. Here on the Vanquisher guitar, as well as on my Necromancer, the X-Type, I have a lot of sharp angles and flat surfaces, and these are actually surprisingly hard to sand. It is almost twice as easy to sand my Alchemist shape, which is all nicely rounded over, as I can just kind of go ham on the sanding, and with all the nicely rounded over corners, you can't really tell as much if something is not perfectly flat. Whereas here, with all these nice facets and angles, I really need to pay attention that I'm using flat sanding blocks and don't accidentally round over any of the corners. Another really tricky area to get is kind of the recurve where the tuner axis is, as it is completely concave there in 2 axes. And that just means that you can't really get in with any sort of sanding tools, and you have to do it by hand. And to make matters worse, it's in end grain, which is always a pain to sand. As a final step here, I'm using this red Scotch-Brite pad to just kind of deepen some of the grain lines. It has a bit of softness to it without being too coarse, and it gives you a little bit of that effect to pronounce the grain of the swamp ash. Now, if you wanted to do a lot more of the kind of super pronounced ash grain, you would use the sandblasting setup to kind of blast out the softer grain lines, but I didn't want to go too crazy with it, just a little subtle enhancement. So using the Scotch-Brite pad worked quite well. And it also just makes sure that the entire surface is nicely uniform. Then it is finally time to glue in the neck. And I do regularly get comments on why I glue in the neck, and if that is strong enough, wouldn't it be much more strong to use bolts instead? And in my opinion, well, bolts are not any stronger. It's just a lot more convenient to bolt on your neck. You can completely finish the body and the neck separately and just bolt them together in the end, and was kind of introduced, I believe, by Fender as a cost-saving measure in the factories. And believe me, I would save probably hours on my builds if I did bolt-on necks. But what you cannot do with a bolt-on neck is kind of super finely taper out the body joint and have almost a neck-through feel. So here, after I glue it in, I go back with this sanding drum. It's just a spindle sander drum that I put on a 3D printed manual, chuck it up in a drill, and now I can really go in and make a perfectly smooth transition, and well, what you get is so much more comfortable than any bolt-on neck could ever be. Then there is a lot more sanding the neck, sanding the rest of the body, fine sanding everything, hours and hours. It's a combination of using the random orbital sander, sometimes with a soft sanding pad on it, sometimes without, and a lot of hand sanding. I like to use these fabric-backed sandpapers as they are a lot sturdier, and I can kind of stretch them across the neck here and smooth out everything nicely. And then sometimes if I see some kind of edges that I need to take off or want to take off a bit more material in one spot, you will use a hard-backed piece of sandpaper and then go back to the softer one to smooth everything out in the end. This sanding steps here are another place where you really differentiate between kind of cheaply built guitar and a more higher end instrument, and it takes a lot of attention to detail to get out all the scratches, and oftentimes it'll look like it's perfect in the wood, and then you apply finish and you see you've missed a bunch of stuff. So applying some water to kind of pop out is one way, and here in this design I'm also starting off by applying this black stain over everything. And this does two things. For one, it allows me to kind of darken the grain by sanding it away after, but it also highlights any sort of imperfections or any swirls that I didn't sand yet and pops the grain for me. And since I have to sand back the black anyhow, that just smooths everything out, and it's a win-win in all cases. I'm also not careful about missing the wenge or anything else here, just applying the stain to everything, and so I will sand it back later. And there's not really anything here on this guitar that I want to keep pristine. I'm going for much more of a kind of weathered red look here, so having a bit of unevenness is actually what I'm going for. To sand back, I'm starting off with the random orbital sander with a fairly fine sandpaper at the areas where I can reach it, and then of course there's a lot to do by hand for all of the edges where I don't want to round anything over, and that is all done by hand later. Inside of the cavities, like where the springs will go for the tremolo system, as well as where the bridge is, I'm consciously not really sanding much of it off, and that will just leave them darker or almost black, and give a kind of a nice contrast and blend into the background without standing out too much. You can see that I didn't paint the holes for the pickups, as I will later apply some shielding paint in there, which will also be black, so that's why I didn't bother putting any stain in there. Then finally it's time to put the red on, and this guitar really becomes alive. I'm using the stunning stains from Crimson here, and the red is the cherry red. The first coat I'm just using the cherry red over the black, and then later I go back in a second coat where I mixed a little bit of black into the red to just kind of get it a bit darker, not quite as bright, and that just makes for more of the color that I was going for. Then to shield the electronics cavity as well as the pickup cutouts, I'm using this shielding paint. That's one way to do it. Another one will be to use kind of copper or aluminum foil. I find the shielding paint more convenient, and it gives like nice black, simple background, and it actually works great. So there's no reason not to use it. And after done with the staining, it's time to clear coat. I'm using my kind of DIY spray booth here. It's really not perfect, but I don't have the space to set up a permanent one. So this is just kind of a shower curtain and then an exhaust with like a big exhaust fan on the bottom, and just making sure to wear all of the PPE, since I am spraying 2K polyurethane finish here, and those include some nasty chemicals in the hardener that you really do not want to breathe in. I am starting off with a fairly heavy coat here of actually gloss lacquer. Later it will be matte, but the gloss lacquer allows me to do much thicker coats, and I can just apply like 1 or 2 base coats, and that gives me the protective finish I need. And whereas if I was doing the matte coats, they have to go in a lot finer. I would have to do probably 5 or 6 of them, so I save a lot of time by going with the gloss here. I also spraying some other guitars at the same time where I need the gloss lacquer, so that also sped up the process. The way I'm holding them here, I'm just using some kind of pipes from the hardware store, and I have a Lazy Susan that I mounted to the ceiling that I can screw it in. That allows me to hold on to the guitars and be able to turn them around nicely so I can access all of the sides. After I sprayed on the gloss lacquer, I did go back and kind of sand everything nicely and flush any sort of kind of raised sections, but this will still be an open pore finish, so all of the pores that we opened up, as well as the wingate pores, which are quite deep, they all are still present, but have just been slightly rounded over by the relatively heavy application of these first 2 coats. And then I sanded them flat again before applying just kind of a matte finish over top. However, it's not 100% fully matte. I added a little bit of the gloss in there, so it's more of a satin, but more on the matte side. It just kind of makes the color pop a little bit more, as with this Crop 2K polyurethane, the matte version of it is extremely matte, and you get almost no contrast and kind of saturation in the colors anymore. So going all the way matte, unless you're doing a matte black or something, it's almost a bit too flat for my taste. After removing the tape from the fretboard, I go back to the edges, and there of course now some paint has built up, so I just kind of make sure that everything is nicely rounded over and feels nice. There's no ugly spots. Sometimes a little bit of paint can get underneath the masking, so cleaning all of that up, and at this point I'm also rounding over the edges of the fretboard to make it more comfortable. I wait to do this until this point because I knew before already that I had to go back to sand anyhow, so this way I'm not doing this step twice. The pickups I'm installing here are the ones I wound in the recent video, so if you want to see how I made those, go back and watch that video. It's really cool. I had the bobbins 3D printed and then of course wound them myself. And to mount them into the guitar here, I'm marking the locations and I'm installing some threaded inserts, and this way I can much more easily take them in and out, and they are hard mounted in there, and but still very easily to remove. The hardware I'm using for this build is from Nova Guitar Parts. They make really affordable headless hardware that still is of decent quality. It costs probably about half of what sort of the higher end headless hardware costs, and but is probably 90% there with the quality. I use it on a lot of my builds, and I'm very happy with it. The way that the tremolo system works, it has kind of two bearings on either side, so it's not like a Floyd Rose where you have a knife edge that it is winding on, but with bearings, so similar to how a Strandberg would be working. But it is quite stable and very easy to adjust. For the electronics covers and as well as the jack cover, I installed some magnets and matching magnets in the covers that I made from some flame maple. And that will mean that I can very easily attach it and there's no ugly screws that I have to hide. Since I'm hard mounting the pickups and I'm also installing some foams underneath, I prefer those over springs as I find that the pickups end up more stable while still being adjustable up and down to be able to get them at the right distance to the strings how you like it. Whereas if you were to just fully hard mount them, they would not be adjustable anymore. Drilling the holes for the claw of the tremolo system is one of those jobs where one of these old kind of egg beater style hand drills actually comes in really useful because it is extremely low profile. With my kind of cordless drill, there's absolutely no way I would be able to pre-drill those holes without having like a 30 centimeter long drill bit. But at the size that I would need to be able to pre-drill a hole, those don't really exist or will be way too floppy. I believe they do make drill extensions that would allow you for something similar, but I have this old hand drill and it is very convenient for this spot and goes quite quick as well. One of the last things I need to do is make the nut. And here I'm actually experimenting by using a Ridgelight nut as well, the same material I used for the fretboard. Usually I go with the Graphtec Tusk, but I've heard from some other people having great success with Ridgelight, so I decided to try it out here as well, and it worked perfectly fine. It feels very similar to the Graphtec, although it is completely different material, but I think it will be just as good. For the spacing here, I'm using the compensated method of spacing it, and I just have this little spacing ruler from StewMac that allows me to get all of the locations dialed in. I just see what kind of fits, and this gives me the correct spacing between them that takes into consideration the thicker strings compared to the thinner ones, and make sure everything looks nice and even. I then used these Hosco nut slotting files to get them to the perfectly sized, and these files can be quite expensive if you're starting out, but they're really worth it, and you can't really make a good nut without a set of nut slotting files. For the headpieces, I'm using the single headpieces from Novar. They usually ship their bridges with kind of a block style headpiece, but I don't really like how it looks. It looks a bit too heavy and bulky in my opinion, especially with my kind of flared out headstock. So I much prefer using their single headpieces. They also have a very large screw. I believe it's an M5 screw that clamps down on the string, and that just allows you to tighten down a lot more, and they really hold your string securely even with just one bolt, whereas some of the other systems they might need two bolts because they're using a thinner one. Now these headpieces are wider than the string spacing, so either you would have to kind of turn every second 180 degrees, that's why they're tapered like this, or because I have a flared out headstock, I actually like the kind of slightly flared look that I will get from the strings here. This is also why they are kind of set back a little bit from the nut, and this allows the strings to separate and create a little bit of an actual headstock feeling without, well, being a headstock guitar. Stringing up the guitar here, in this case I'm using a set of 1056 strings because I plan on, at least for now, have it tuned to C standard for arch enemy tuning. But if you are buying this guitar, which by the way it is available for sale, then of course I can put on any set of strings you like and put it into any tuning that you like. So if you want E standard, I'd probably go for like a 942 set of strings. That is a bit softer, but since this is only 25 to 25.5 inch scale length, for the lower tuning such as C or C sharp, even D, the thicker strings will be a lot better, otherwise they will get too floppy. And with that, here we go. The first Vanquisher build is completed. I'm really happy with it came out. I really like the kind of dark weathered red color, and it fits, I believe, this shape beautifully. And because I really enjoyed building this guitar kind of to my own specifications, I decided to go ahead and build another to-spec guitar, this time another Necromancer build. I really liked how a recent one I built without a video came out. It was kind of a poplar burl top in purple with a mahogany body. So I decided to kind of take that and go even further. Now, with that said, this guitar had all the potential to become my favorite guitar ever. I was building it based on specs that turned out really great in the past. I had all the freedom to do whatever I wanted. But it turns out that I learned quite a big design lesson on this guitar, and I actually was never really truly happy about how this one turned out. Now, it's not a bad guitar in any way, just the design did not live up to my expectations. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's first build this guitar. You can probably also notice that the CNC I'm using here looks a bit different than it did before. And that's because I built an entirely new CNC from scratch specifically for my guitar building process. This was a major project and took me quite a while. Did a whole series about it on my workshop YouTube channel. And main idea was just to boost my productivity, allow me to build better guitars, bigger guitars, and kind of just make the process more enjoyable. The main difference is that there is an automatic tool changer, meaning I don't have to manually go in and swap tools in the middle of the program, but it can automatically switch between them. It's also quite a bit larger, so I will be able to make neck-through guitars and kind of have more things going on at the same time. In addition to that, it's just built a lot sturdier, so that I can take heavier cuts and kind of get a better result. Now, this doesn't really change anything fundamentally in my process. It just kind of makes things easier and quicker, and well, will hopefully lead to better guitars. The wood you see here on the fretboard is black palm, and in case you ever have the desire to work with this wood, or I don't know, buy a piece of it, just don't. Do yourself a favor. You will live such a more happy life. Your hands will feel better, your stress levels will be lower. Just do not give in to the temptation of buying black palm. It is the single worst wood to work with. It is super hard, but at the same time has these kind of soft spots in between, so it splinters really easily and is almost impossible to sand. I have more tear out than actual pieces of wood left in the fretboard. So while the final result looks actually decent, most of that is just black CA glue.
Remains my
Now, as I'm wrapping up this guitar here, I wonder, can you already tell what my big design mistake was? Now, it's definitely something that's also personal preference, but my main issue with this guitar is that there's too much busy pattern going on. You can see that very beautiful pattern top, and that was my main intention. I wanted that top. But then I also went ahead and picked a very busy fretboard wood with the black palm. It has a lot of very small speckles that will work if you have a more simple body, but with that, this kind of already complicated top wood, it kind of clashes. And then to make matters worse, the inlay I chose was pieces of the top wood, which once again in a clean fretboard would look great. But here it just makes it that much more busy and you can't really distinguish it well. Then less planned, but just kind of how it happened is that the body wood, the kind of mahogany wood that I chose here, was a more busy piece, not as quite as uniform as the ones I used in the past. And same for the neck. It's a kind of nice patterned mahogany neck, but also just adds even more busyness to the whole design. So if I were to build this guitar over, not many changes are actually necessary. I think I would go for just a simple plain black body, just kind of spray it black, and go maybe with rich light for the fretboard, just to have a very simple base to kind of highlight all of the nice figured top wood here. The next guitar build coming up jumps ahead quite a bit chronologically. We're skipping almost 10 guitar serial numbers at this point. Just didn't really film them. I was quite busy with orders, and well, you can go check them out on the website. I have full pictures of all of them. This one here is finally my first neck through guitar. I had built the CNC quite a while ago at this point, and I finally got around to building a neck through. This started out as a stock build, and once again, this is a fully narrated video, so I'm gonna shut up here and let you listen to all of the nitty-gritty details. So I start off here by milling up some wood. This will become the neck. And I'm using some nice Swiss flint maple here, which will make up the majority. And then I'm adding in a couple of wenge pieces just as accent pieces. This maple is very nicely quarter sawn, so I really don't need the wenge for strength, and I will actually keep the grain orientation of the maple the same, so like the flame will be continuous throughout the neck, and the wenge is just there as visual accents. Now, another reason why I haven't built the neck through guitar so far is that it just is a whole lot more complicated in terms of figuring out in which order you need to do which steps, so that you don't build yourself into a corner. With a standard guitar where you have either a screw-on neck, or like I usually do it where I glue it in, so a set neck, you can build the neck and the body separately until basically the finishing stages, which is a lot more easier to handle, and you don't really need to worry about things colliding. However, with a neck through guitar, it is just one linear progression where both the body and the neck get built at the same time. So here you can see I finished up the neck blank, and it's on the CNC for the first time of many times, and I want to have kind of the taper of the neck fall throughout the body instead of just having a square neck through section on the body. So this is what I'm cutting here, kind of the taper that will later become the neck as well. I'm only cutting where I will glue on the body so that later when I cut the neck part, this will line up perfectly. Here, if I'm off by like half a millimeter or so, this will not really be noticeable in the end. So that's kind of how I'm planning these operations. To be able to locate it back on the CNC, I have these two locating dowels that align with my CNC bed as well, and they allow me to get it back on in a mostly repeatable fashion. The wings that I will be using are some ash, and actually I only really noticed this when I started working on it, but I had these two pieces left over from other builds, and they kind of perfectly matched up. But I later realized that one of them is European ash and the other one is American swamp ash. And while they are very similar, you definitely feel it while working that the swamp ash is a lot lighter and softer as well, whereas the European ash is quite a bit denser. The patternation is also slightly different, but I decided to not kind of do over once I realized, but continue with it as I think it looks perfectly fine, and we're still within ash, so the sonic characteristics should be similar. The pieces I had were super thick, so before kind of flattening them on the CNC or anything else, I cut them down on the bandsaw, just kind of resawing them a bit. To get the connection nice between the neck and these body wings, I'm doing some proper hand woodworking with this big plane here, and just trying to get it 90 degrees and nice and flat, going back and forth with this little square and also straight edge to make sure that there's no hump in it. Now, I'm not the best with a plane, and it could probably also be sharpened. So after planing it, I'm going back in with a leveling beam and some 120 sandpaper on it, just to make sure that it is perfect before gluing. The top for this guitar will be made out of this beautiful piece of Bastogne walnut. I had this laying around for a while and I thought it was just the perfect piece for this build. So I'm getting ready to glue it up here, just using my little jointing jig here to get a nice straight, perfect 90-degree face here. And this walnut also just planes beautifully and produces these nice little curls. Now at this point, all of this is also still intended as a stock build. I'm just kind of making up the specs as I go with materials I have laying around and what I think will make for a beautiful guitar. I later posted on Instagram with my progress and asked if anybody was interested, and it did not take long for it to sell before it was even completed. So unfortunately, this guitar is no longer for sale. My top gluing jig here just allows me to apply a bit of pressure from the side with these wedges. It really doesn't need a whole lot because it is such a thin section. You don't really need all that much clamping pressure. And then the piece that I'm clamping over top here is to keep them perfectly aligned to each other. I have a little bit of wiggle room. The top is still thicker than what it needs to be in the end, but I still want to get it as close as at all possible. So I'm just clamping it flat this way. When gluing up these body wings here, that's the first step where I can really need to pay attention that it is nicely aligned, because I want to have a flat bottom here. I will be kind of machining part of it again, but if it doesn't line up perfectly at the bottom with the neck, that will just mean it doesn't sit nicely on the CNC and I will have a whole host of problems. There are ways that I could have worked around it and kind of used maybe my drum sander afterwards to flatten it, but I had already thicknessed the neck, and so I just make sure that it is nicely aligned once again here with some clamps and a piece of wood underneath. And then after it's dried, I'm just using a card scraper here to get all the glue squeeze out and make sure that the transition is nice and smooth. To prepare the body for the top, it is once again back on the CNC, and I'm cutting away the part of the neck where the top is going to sit, and then also cutting in some of the recesses already that will be hidden. Like there's a little bit of chambering in the bottom part, which is the European ash, just to make it lighter, as well as the cable channels. I also like to bend the arm bevel over top so that the top kind of doesn't get cut off. So this is also what I'm preparing here. Well, I usually can get away by just gluing on the top rough cut, and then the neck pocket is cut afterwards. Because the neck is part of the body, I have to kind of use the CNC here to get my top cut out already fairly close. Now the overall outline here is still oversized. I will cut that later, but the neck pocket is already perfectly defined so that it locates on it and I can glue it on. Now before I can glue it on the body, I do need to prepare it. Both the body needs to be kind of sanded smooth so that it is ready for the top to be glued on. There are a bit of machining marks, of course, as is natural from the CNC. It rarely ever produces anything finished. And I'm also gluing in the carbon fiber reinforcement into the neck here. Once again, this maple is very nice and stiff, so it really is not necessary probably, but I just add these to all of my guitars. They're 6mm square carbon fiber rods. Get them from a composite supplier, and they just add a little bit of insurance policy that the neck is nice and stable and doesn't move too much over time. just aids with tuning stability and peace of mind. By using some acetone to wipe off the excess epoxy, I can later use wood glue and it will stick nicely. I then use my drum sander to get the top to the final thickness, making sure that it is just perfect. I usually go for around 5 millimeters, which is also what I did here. The fit for the neck needed a little bit of finessing by hand, but that is actually perfect. I'd rather have a bit undersized and need to sand it by hand and get a very nice and tight fit. To get the arm bevel, it is not enough to just kind of clamp it in place. The wood is way too stiff for that. So I'm using this bending iron and wetting down the wood and trying to bend it. Now, usually I use poplar or maple for the guitar tops, and those two woods bend very easily. It doesn't take a lot of force and heat to get them to match the shape perfectly. But this Bastogne walnut was just a bore. It took a lot of force, a lot of heat, and I still only kind of sort of got it close. I then, once I had a bit of a bend in it, clamped it down, and as you can hear, unfortunately, I still had a little bit of a crack. This was gut-wrenching when I heard it, but I still finished clamping it in place so that it can kind of dry and cool down in this shape. And I just kind of filled in the tiny crack. It's almost not visible, just with some sawdust and epoxy here, sanding it flush. And then in the finished result, you probably would have not been able to tell until I just told you now that there is a little bit of a fix. In guitar building, sometimes things happen, and the only thing you can do is fix it and move on. Just starting over is not always an option. Like, I don't have another one of these walnut pieces, and I cannot go to the local hardware store and get one either. Back on the CNC, we are for what feels like gazillionth time, now cutting out the outline of the guitar, as well as all the pockets, like for the pickups and the bridge and everything like that. Now, unfortunately, with the dust shoe, you really can't see much going on in the CNC, so I'm just speeding through these montages. But I'm roughing out all of it with the bigger tools first, and then using ball and mill to kind of get all the radii and things pre-prepared to just save a bit on sanding. To machine the bottom of it, I need to flip it over, and usually that is no problem, as I have this flat top that I can easily fixture down to the table. But here I have a neck piece which is higher up than the body piece. So I'm adding this kind of MDF spacer here that just is an old template, and it happened to be the right thickness. So I'm using the masking tape and super glue trick here to hold the template to the body and as well as the guitar to my CNC. Once again, aligning it with these dowels that I have put in place. This is sturdy enough, while definitely not the most secure setup, but it's the easiest thing I could come up with in the moment without making a proper fixture for it. And I'm kind of hesitant usually to build fixtures, as while I build a lot of similar guitars, they all end up being slightly different from each other. So while I might build a fixture for this, chances are next time it's going to be a different scaling, so something else is going to be different, and I'd have to completely remake the fixture. So I prefer these kind of easier, smaller hacks rather than making a full nice fixture out of some pristine stock. Cutting the bottom outline here is actually quite satisfying. I only usually cut the body and the neck separately, of course, but here I'm actually cutting out the entire guitar essentially in one go, which is kind of fun to watch and definitely looks cool. You can also see here how the neck is nicely lining up with the body wings, and there is basically no misalignment here. Always very happy when things line up and it actually works out as I intended. The neck at this point is also still very, very chunky, and a lot of material needs to be removed, which is another kind of downside of neck through guitars, that there's just a lot more waste for the neck. I'm essentially cutting away like half the neck, and while I could try to cut it off with a bandsaw, the leftover piece that I have is kind of an awkward size where it's too big to throw away and too small to actually do something with it. So instead of trying to take it off and do that, I'm just milling it all away with the CNC, and that is just easier than trying to relocate everything again, and well, a bit wasteful, but nothing we can do about it. Then on the back, a bunch more 3D surfacing, both for the neck and all the body contours. I will still go back and refine all of the curves and shapes, but this will give me a good start. With that, the body is mostly done and we can start moving on to the fretboard. The first step for that is cutting out all of the different inlay pieces. The inlay for this guitar will be made out of aluminum. So here I'm starting out by cutting out my logo. I'm using a 2mm end mill here to cut out the rough shape. That's just a lot easier to cut with a larger end mill. Using compressed air here to cool it down a bit and blow away the chips, as well as periodically just adding a drop of oil. Well, this aluminum here was sold to me as 6061. I'm pretty sure it's a different alloy, and it's kind of gummy to machine. To get the actually sharp corners of my logo a bit sharper, I'm going back in here with a 0.6mm end mill and an adaptive rest machining strategy to sharpen up the corners a bit. For the position markers, I will be using circles, and for that I'm just cutting up some 6mm aluminum tube. This is a very easy way to make a nice circle inlays, provided that you can find some tube with an even wall thickness, which turned out to be surprisingly difficult, as most tube kind of ended up being uneven all around and not as nice. The fretboard here is this very unique piece of marbled ebony. Now, it's just regular ebony, but has some like lighter colors that kind of got in splotchy places here. I really liked this piece when I saw it, so I just had to buy it. And I think it will go very well with the top as well. Starting off by facing it close to the final thickness, and then cutting out the perimeter shape before cutting the little inlay pockets. Once again, it's really hard to see anything going on with the dust shoe, so we're just moving on to actually installing these inlays. And I probably should have made the pockets a little bit larger, because these required quite a bit of persuasion to get them in. But on the positive side, this means that the final inlay is very tight and there's basically no gap. Not that you could really tell, since I'm using black CA glue here, which blends in very nicely with the wood, and the entire thing just looks nice and seamless. For radiusing the fretboard, I'm using an 1/8 inch bullnose end mill, meaning it has kind of a flat bottom but rounded corners, and this allows me to get a very nice and smooth finish, and I can do quite a bit larger step overs than I could do with a ball end mill without getting too many ridges. I also decided to not use the dust tree here, since there's not as much dust created and you can finally see some actual cutting action. And you can also see just how easy CNC is, and look at this beautiful tear out that we get here on this ebony. I will fix this later with some CA glue, just kind of gluing it back in place and fixing any other spots. And for the fret slots, I'm starting by scoring them with this V-bit that just kind of creates a bit of a chamfer and guides the very fragile fret slotting tool here. And this is actually really speed cutting here with this 0.58mm fret slotting end mill. It's a 3-flute tool, and you do want to feed it fast enough. With the 30,000 RPM spindle I have here from Spinergy, this looks scary fast, but I got through the job no problem without breaking the tool. To align the fretboard while gluing it down, I'm drilling 2 little holes here through the fret slots and using some 1mm nails, hammering them into the neck just as deep as I drilled it, not really hammering them any further, and then cutting off the head, just leaving maybe like a 1mm sticking out. This is enough to locate the fretboard to the exact position, but not enough to interfere with anything. And before forgetting, I'm also drilling the truss rod access hole here, just kind of trying to aim at the right place. I've gotten decently good at it with some practice, but you can always go up one drill size if you don't end up hitting it perfectly. Quickly checking with an Allen key, and we're good to go. Gluing this fretboard on is not that easy, just because the guitar is already assembled instead of having just the neck. So I'm using the vacuum clamping system that I've been using for the last couple of guitars, which works really nice and easy if it's just the neck, and it also doesn't look as ridiculous. But here I had to put the entire guitar into the vacuum bag just to be able to clamp the neck. But in the end, that worked out just fine as well, and the neck got properly clamped without any gaps anywhere. Ideally, at this point, I would have also put in the side dots into the guitar fretboard. However, I did not do that, and I actually did not realize that I forgot to do that until basically the assembly step, so I had to get a bit creative with that. Once again, another advantage to a set neck where I can finish the neck and then do the dot inlays on the side. And with the guitar essentially fully completed, it is time for sanding. And in guitar building is 10% actual woodworking and the rest is sanding. And I will spare you most of it, so however much sanding I'm showing you here, multiply that by 10 or maybe 20 or 30 actually, and that's roughly how much sanding there was in proportion to everything else I've shown you. This Festool Rotex 90 sander is absolutely amazing for guitar building. It is small enough that you can get in quite a lot of the little curves which a larger 5 or 6 inch sander could not possibly reach. And while it is kind of expensive, it has easily paid itself already in time saved just over the course of the last couple of guitar builds that I've done with it. And while it is a great time saver, nothing gets around hand sanding, and especially all the corners and roundovers and hard to reach spots all need to be touched up by hand, and in many different steps, going up the grids, back down if I see some more imperfections. It's a large back and forth progress. Then for the fretting, once again, the first step, as with everything here, is sanding. More precisely, kind of level sanding the fretboard. I've tried to make sure that everything is nice and flat. The fretboard is the right even thickness throughout, the neck is as flat as possible, and it's glued on without distortions as much as possible. However, it never ends up perfectly flat, so I need to go back and flatten everything before installing the frets. And that's also why I can't really install the frets before gluing on the fretboard, just because that wouldn't allow me to flatten the fretboard, and I would have to do everything on the frets, which would mean just a tremendous amount of fret work. I go back and forth between the leveling beam to get it nice and straight, as well as this radiusing block to make sure that the 16-inch radius that I chose here is nice and even all throughout. And while on the CNC, adding scallops is not much extra work, when it comes to preparing the fretboard and sanding it, they sure add up a lot. I will easily spend 2 hours just sanding all of these fillets up the grids and making sure that they look nice. I usually like to go up to around 800 or 1000 grit for my fretboards to have them nice and silky smooth, and that also kind of polishes up the aluminum pieces. At this point, I also fix any small tear out that I wasn't able to glue back on, so I'm just using some black CA glue, building it up and kind of drying it with the accelerator. And since there's a lot of black spots in this ebony anyhow, it will be absolutely impossible to see the black CA glue versus the black ebony. That is one of the great things about ebony. It's really easy to fix with black CA glue. Now, the actual threading I did not get any footage of for some reason, but next is kind of getting all the frets end to the right length so that they're nice and flush. If you were doing nickel silver frets, this is also easy to do, and if you're doing the neck by itself, this is easy to do. I can just go on the belt sander and kind of do most of it there, but here, of course, a lot of it I cannot actually reach on the belt sander, so there's a lot of using this hand file, which allows me to first get them at a 90-degree angle, and then here what I'm doing is kind of beveling them, and a lot of hand sanding of that. It took quite a while because the file doesn't take up that much, and stainless steel is really hard to file. After that, it's back to the leveling beam, getting the frets all perfectly level. Now, they should be very close already because we leveled the fretboard before, but they might not be all installed quite the same thickness, and there's also some slight tolerances from the manufacturing process for the frets. Now I'm using Jescar stainless steel frets here, which are very high quality, so it's mainly my installation and not the frets themselves. The rest of the process is more or less standard procedure. kind of rounding over the ends with a crowning file. And then I'm using this diamond file here from StewMac, the Z file, to re-establish the crown where I kind of sanded off a little flat spot at the top of the fret. Then the last step is getting them all nice and shiny again. So I'm starting at 400 grit after the diamond file and kind of switching up, going perpendicular and along the frets, moving up to 600 grit and sometimes 800 as well before going to a two-step polish. I'm using these kind of cloth polishing wheels chucked up in my drill, and they make pretty good work of this fret polishing, just using metal polishing paste here, nothing special. And this actually goes quite quick and the results are great. You just absolutely have to tape up your fretboard for this, otherwise you will get the fretboard completely caked with the polishing compound. And then time to peel off the tape. That's always a very satisfying reveal when you have this kind of dirty, ugly thing and take off the tape and see the first part of the guitar essentially finished. Using some mineral spirits to wipe off any excess polishing paste that got in the way, as well as any glue residue from the tape. And the mineral spirits just kind of don't react with the wood at all and dry off quickly, as well as are a great solvent for any residue. And 3 guesses what the next step is. If you guess anything else but sanding, then you're wrong. You haven't learned anything I just taught you. Next step, of course, is sanding. Much more sanding. Now we're getting to the kind of detailed, fine sanding steps. The shape is there. It's already roughly there. Now I'm sanding at 180 grit and then 240 grit as well. Just getting all the last roundovers perfectly right so that they're nice and even all around and everything looks nice. There's no coarse sanding scratches anymore. This is really where a high quality guitar gets made. If you skimp on these steps, you will later regret it when you apply the finish, and all of a sudden all of your little sanding mistakes are much more apparent than they were before. I also do a quick water pop here, which is very satisfying as you see kind of the grain revealed. And that just makes sure that all of the fibers from the wood grain that kind of were pushed down get raised up so that I can go back and sand them off before applying the first steps of the finish. The top of this guitar will be high gloss, whereas the body will be open pore kind of satin. So I'm masking off the transition area between the top and the body here, so I can pore fill just on the top and kind of leave the nice deep pores from the ash open. I really like doing open pore ash bodies. They just have a lot of character and it kind of gives some texture to the whole thing. And here now comes the money shot, applying the epoxy grain filler. And as fun and satisfying as that just was, as well as this nice tape hole, 3 guesses what the next step is. Yes, you've correctly learned. The next step, of course, is sanding, kind of sanding the grain filler flat again and making sure that the transition between where I applied grain filler and where there's no grain filler is nice and smooth and there is no ridge buildup there. But before we can get to the finish, I need to cut the electronics cover here. I'm doing this out of 2mm aluminum sheet. This allows me to connect a jack directly to the cover and it's a kind of a sturdy attachment point. I definitely did not steal that from Strandberg. Well, good designs are supposed to be stolen. Then just bending over the place where the jack gets attached and the vise here. And behind it you can already see the tent setup for my finishing setup. I don't have space for a proper spray booth, so this kind of grow tent is what I use instead with a nice exhaust fan and filter. And then the actual spray finishing, I completely forgot to record. So here's me spray finishing a different guitar. You might have seen this on my channel, and if you haven't already, make sure to go check out that video after you finish this one. Really cool guitar. Then with the first base coat of the finish applied, I paint all of the cavities here. For the pickups, it's mostly just to make it look clean, having the black background there. It also adds a bit of shielding, but it's not as necessary as in the electronics cavity, where of course we do absolutely want to have it shielded. The reason I apply this now instead of before or later is just now it's easier to apply because it doesn't soak into the wood anymore, and I can also very easily kind of sand off any excess that got over it because I already have kind of some finish underneath. And the reason why I don't do it in the very end is that this way the next step when I finish, spray more finish, it will kind of protect it, as this shielding paint is quite fragile and will easily kind of scratch off and look not as nice anymore. Then after some more spray finishing, I didn't film, it is time to level sand the top. This is a careful act of kind of using most of the Rotex sander here, as well as some of it by hand, using 800 grit, and I want to make sure that I get out all of the imperfections. It's nice and level without sanding through at any one spot. It's really difficult because you have not really any idea how much further can you sand. You just kind of have to trust based on your experience of how much finish you applied and how much you've sanded in this spot, but you really need to watch out, especially on the corners, that you don't accidentally sand too much in one spot and sand through. Because once you sand through, there's no other option than to spray another coat and kind of restart your sanding. For the sanding, I go up through the grits, 800, then 1200 or 1500, whatever I have in hand, until I finish off with a 2000 grit sponge sander on the Rotex. And then I move on to the polishing of the top here, using the StuMax system with these foam attachments for your drill. This is a really easy way without having to have a buffing wheel of kind of getting a pretty good buff and fairly quick buff as well compared to doing it completely by hand. I'm starting with the fine medium here, and I don't do the medium as I've already sanded up to 2000 grit, and I find that the kind of medium polishing paste is just a bit too coarse and doesn't work that well. So I start with the fine and go over everything. I usually find a bunch more scratches where I have to go back and use either the 2000 grit ideally, or sometimes I have to go all the way back to 800 grit and do some more sanding to get all the scratches out. Going back to polishing to see the new scratches back and forth, until I'm finally happy with what I have. And after I went over everything and all the scratches are out, I can then move on to the swirl remover. That's their finest polishing paste, and go over everything again and give it the final nice and pristine shine. I definitely don't enjoy high gloss finishes. I personally am not a huge fan of how they feel. Well, I do like how they look, but I'm definitely not a fan of making them. It's just a lot of stress of accidentally kind of sanding through or burning through. Even in the polishing step, you can still, if you stay on one spot too long, you can burn through it and you have to start all over. This actually happened to me on this guitar, where in the polishing step, I burned through in one spot and then had to go all the way back, respray it, resand it, go up the grits again and then repolish it. It's a huge pain, but I guess that only can be fixed with experience. But what is undeniable is that for a top like this, high gloss will just give you the most depth, the most pristine color and luster. So I'm more than happy then to do it to kind of get the best end result. At this point, also the client had bought the guitar, so it was the client's choice to go here with high gloss, as I was originally going to do a satin top, since it was going to be a stock build, and I'm not quite that much of a masochist that I choose the hardest finish for a stock build. Since the back will be satin, right now it's just still gloss, just not fully polished. I'm now masking off the top to be able to spray a nice satin coat over the back and as well as the neck. Doing it in this order is the easiest for me, as I can take as many attempts as I need for the top and then just in the very end add a very thin coat over the back. And I usually spray all my base layers for the satin guitars in gloss anyhow, as the gloss paint can build a lot higher and thicker layers, so I only need to spray 2 or 3 layers instead of 10 or 20 with satin lacquer. So here I actually managed to record the spraying, so you can see that I just dusted with a very light coat everywhere that will be satin. And the product I'm using here is from MIPS. The high gloss I'm using is Crop. And that's just brands I can get here locally. If you live somewhere else, you will probably have different brands. You might be able to see that when it goes on fresh, it actually looks somewhat glossy, but then once it dries, it turns more of a satin matte color. Finally, done with the lacquering, and I could take that big spray booth back down. While it is great to be able to temporarily set up a spray booth in your workshop, it does mean that I cannot access about half of my drawers, and half of my workshop is taken up by this big tent. So I'm always very eager to be done with the spraying and be able to take the spray booth back down so I can access all of the tools and everything that was hidden to me before. Before removing the tape off of the fretboard, I kind of go around with a scalpel blade and break the seal of where the lacquer kind of built up a bit. This just makes sure that when I rip it off, there's no kind of tear out or big chunks of the finish on the side. After, I also go back in with the X-Acto knife here to kind of break the edge of the fretboard, as well as remove any of the finish that kind of made its way in between the tape. The final step before assembly then is to apply the oil to the fretboard, which makes it come alive as well and protects it as well. This should last for quite a while, and it is also very easy to touch up and will make sure that your fretboard stays nice and pristine. And always remember that after you've applied oil to your fretboard, let it soak in for a couple minutes maybe, but then wipe off all of the excess. You don't want to just leave the buildup on there, as when it kind of dries or cures, it will just become gummy and not very nice. For the assembly, I like to use threaded inserts to mount my pickups. I also use foams instead of springs for the direct mount here. So I'm installing some M3 threaded inserts here. And for the pickups, I usually have to drill them out, as most of them come threaded to be used kind of with a pickup surround, but I'm not using pickup surrounds here, so I drill those out for 3mm, which works quite easily. And then use these threaded inserts in the body. I use the same ones as well for the electronics cover. That way it's just a bit nicer if you have to take the electronics cover off and back on. It's not wood screws that will wear out over time, but it's threaded inserts that, well, you can thread in and out as many times as you like. Installing the bridge here, the grounding wire, I should have definitely drilled that hole before I did all of the finishing. This was very scary, having to drill into this pristine glossy top here. But luckily it worked out fine without any issues, and I could get the grounding wire installed. And this just goes underneath all of the individual saddles here for this technology for musicians bridge that I'm using for this guitar. In the background here, you can also see another guitar just peeking through. If you want to see more about that, you can go follow me on Instagram. I only post a very small fraction of all of my builds here on YouTube, as making these long-form guitar building videos take a lot of time, as well as filming a guitar. It also makes all of the different processes take longer. So only a couple of guitars get this full treatment. And for the rest, you'll have to go check out my Instagram or my website in case you don't have Instagram. And in case you see this guitar coming together here now and you're just absolutely in love with how it looks, don't be too sad that it is not available. While this guitar is sold already, you can of course go reach out to me, and I'm happy to build you something similar. Now, it will never be exactly the same thing, as I'm not building factory guitars. Every single one is going to be unique, but that I think also adds to the charm and means that you can customize just about every little detail that you like. The pickups for this build are Fishman Fluence Moderns. Somehow lately I've been kind of on a Fishman trend. Just about everybody that contacted me wanted Fishman pickups. So I have like 5 guitars in a row with Fishman pickups, and I decided on Fishman pickups for this, what was originally stock build, way before all of these orders came in. So it's kind of funny how that worked out. Main reason why I'm going with the Moderns here instead of the Tosin DeBassi signature ones, which I usually prefer, is because the Moderns are available with these chrome tops, which well, match the rest of the chrome hardware beautifully. But of course, the differences are not that big between the moderns and the Tosna Bassi ones. The headpieces here are also from Technology for Musicians, and they nicely screw down onto the string, which means that you can have the ball end by the bridge, and then you can thread them through the headstock and screw them down there, and it holds nice and tight, and it's quite easy to string up and change any strings if you ever need to. For the nut, lately I've started using Richlight as a material for it instead of just using Graphtec, and I actually had great success with that. Now, using Richlight for fretboards I've done for quite a while and it's very common, but material also works very nice for nuts and actually cuts and kind of behaves very similarly to Graphtec, and is, well, a fraction of the price, and because the blocks are a bit bigger, I can very easily just chuck them up in the CNC like this and kind of get the rough shape of the nut already done, get it to the right width, and get all the strings spacing started. But of course, I still have to go in by hand, get it to the perfect thickness for a tight fit, and cutting in all of the nut slots with the nut slotting files for the exact string gauge that this build will be using. This is another advantage of going with a custom build. I always ask the client what tuning they will be using and discuss which string gauge will be the right fit for them based on if they like a lighter or a tighter feel. And that allows me to cut the nut just fitting perfectly to the gauge that will be actually used. And this means I can have very nice low action and the strings are held in nice and firm, there's no play, and everything just feels perfect. The strings for this build here is a set of 1056s, so fairly heavy gauge as the client likes to really chuck down on the strings and get some heavy fast riffs in. My personal preference usually is quite a bit lighter. I'm more of a 942 kind of guy, but to each their own, and it's always nice to be able to set it up exactly to what it will be used for. I'm also adding Schaller S-Locks strap buttons here, which just is very high quality strap lock system. That means that when this guitar is hopefully played on stage or just at home with a strap, it is nice and secure and will not go anywhere. The wiring for Fishman can get a bit messy just because there is these 3 voices that you need to switch with the 2 push-pull knobs and for the 2 pickups, but I've kind of gotten in a rhythm of making everything nice and neat, and I think the wiring turned out quite clean and everything actually worked first try. Now, first time installed Fishmans, that definitely was not the case. And with that, this guitar is completed, and here you can see some beauty shots. What do you guys think? Is this a guitar that you would want? Leave a comment down below what you like about it, what you don't like, what would you do different. I am absolutely in love with it, and I'm kind of sad that it is going away already, but that's just how it goes. The best guitars are always the quickest to leave. Now, one of the builds that we skipped just before the Blue Rain was actually my very first Alchemist bass. I didn't record that, and then I didn't get an order for another bass for quite a while. But here actually, I mentioned it on the on-screen display, the fiance of the first bass customer reached out to me, and they were getting married, and she wanted to gift him her custom bass. I thought that was a beautiful idea, and although the timeline was a bit tight, I decided that I couldn't pass up this opportunity. He apparently liked his first bass a lot, and even when prompted by his bandmates if there's anything he would change about it or what he liked or disliked about it, couldn't really figure out anything that he didn't like. So we decided to go with a very similar design to the first one, at least in the body style. But then for the aesthetics, we based the colors on the wedding colors that they went with, and just kind of picked something unique, something that looks a bit different to what he had before, but still kind of fits the same style. Definitely was a fun challenge, building a guitar for a specific client, so it's not a stock build, yet I cannot actually ask the client any questions. Luckily, we had talked in depth about all of his different wishes and preferences when I built the first guitar for him, so I already knew that he definitely wanted a high gloss guitar, knew which pickup he liked, and kind of what his general preferences are. So I was fairly confident that the kind of specs choices were gonna be great, and when it came to the design, of course, the fiancée was able to have a lot more input. While she doesn't know a thing about bass guitars and what makes them good or bad, design is definitely a different story. Now, in terms of the guitar shape design, this is of course based on my Alchemist guitar model, but I did have to change it to make it work with a much longer scale length, of course. Instead of having like 25 to 25.5 inch scale on my 6-string Alchemist model, here we have a 34 to 36 inch scale. So the entire body had to get a bit larger and a bit longer for one to just kind of make space for the neck and have all the way till the bridge, but also just to kind of balance it all out. It is a headless guitar, so the headstock is not pulling it down that much, but still a long 5-string neck has quite a bit of weight to it. Now, the final guitar weight comes in very, very low for a bass guitar. That is just due to kind of my approach to the construction as well as it being headless. But still, compared to a guitar, it's quite a bit heavier. In general, I am more approaching this from a point of view of a large guitar rather than somebody that has a lot of experience playing bass. I'm more of a guitar player myself, so that's kind of my starting point. Though, based on the response of Rafi, the client here, I think I did a fairly good job. And here we go, the bass is all done, but at this time of course the customer still had no idea that it even existed. I got some pictures now that'll show you of the big surprise, and I think looking at his face, I didn't do that bad of a job with this guitar. With these builds here, we're also getting closer and closer to current time. There's not that much in between here anymore. This build here is another one that turned out really good. Maybe it's just that I'm a sucker for Buckeye Burl, but I was a big fan of this. The customer for this guitar is Ivan Ferros of Perennial Isolation, as well as Ivan Ferros, and he does a lot of atmospheric black metal, but is also very active on Instagram, making covers of all kinds of different songs. Gluing on the Buckeye Burl top onto the body here, you can see that I played a little bit of creative puzzling with the upper horn pieces, just kind of reduced the size of the voids a bit as they went all the way through the horn, and that way I need less epoxy and there is more actual wood to look at. Before filling it with epoxy, I'm also staining it here for the first time. Most of that will get sanded off again, but whenever you apply epoxy to a porous wood like Buckeye Burl, it will seep into the edges, and then there's kind of epoxy impregnated and it will not stain properly again later. So just to be sure that I don't get any weird white spots, I went ahead and stained it once, and then the actual final staining will happen much later. The actual inlay that I'm doing here, or the epoxy pour, is of a glow-in-the-dark green. That is the whole theme of this build, the kind of toxic sludge while still keeping it elegant. On the fretboard, on the 12th fret, there is his logo as an inlay, and I think this is a very beautiful logo to kind of fit into this guitar. It matches really well. And here I'm using a kind of combination of both glow-in-the-dark pigments, but one of them is white by daylight, or at least mostly white, whereas the other one is green by daylight, and that just kind of creates a little bit of a contrast between the circles and the logo itself. At night they will both glow green, of course, and then match with the glowing pockets on the body, which is going to create a really cool aesthetic. Now, as you can see, the body of course is going to be super high gloss, but one thing I always offer with high gloss bodies is to keep the neck satin. The way I do this is spray high gloss the same as everything else, but then don't actually polish it, and in the very end mask off the body and spray a very thin layer of a matte finish over top of the neck. This just makes sure that the neck doesn't get that kind of sticky glossy feeling whenever you slide up and down it, and you can still keep the high gloss on the body but keep the nice feel on the neck. I think that's a really good balance. Of course, if you prefer the high gloss neck, I can also do that. And with this, I'm closing off the electronics cabinet, another Fishman install. At this point, they have become pretty routine. Now, I really hope that you guys enjoyed this quite long form video. And if you are still here and still listening to me babbling on, leave a comment down below. This is a very long video, but I think it kind of shows a nice view into my journey from somebody just starting out guitar building, having no idea about anything, and then kind of progressing through, learning a lot of things, upgrading the gear. And I believe now my guitars are finally at the level that I actually want them to be at. Of course, I'm still improving with every single one, but I no longer feel like I am way below the level of kind of what other people think of the guitars. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. If you are looking for a guitar like this, do contact me. You can contact me through my website or shoot me a DM on Instagram, and I'll gladly work with you to create your own custom, unique instrument. So with that said, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you next time.